Um, Next panel, creating simplicity where there is complexity. How can we improve network experience and deliver better quality of experience? So today I've got a bunch of panelists to discuss this. I'll let them each say a one sentence, no more introduction, one sentence, no more than that, of who they are and where they're from. Who wants to go first? Ross.
Hey guys, Ross Cassan here. I'm from Spirent Communications, and I focus on service assurance.
Chris.
Chris Hristov from AT&T, and I focus on kind of network performance, optimization, mobility predominantly.
And Greg.
Greg Agami, Director of Network Solutions with UScellular in Chicago, focusing on network core planning and design.
And I'm Ian Fogg. I lead the networks research practice at industry analyst firm CCS Insights, and I'm chairing the panel. So these guys are the key people to speak. I'm just going to try and pose some questions at them. So we're going to start off by saying, why is testing needed to improve the quality of experience? Why does it matter? Aren't network probes and the kind of stats that operators get back from their own networks sufficient metrics? Why do we need to test? Real basic question to kick off the day.
I can start with saying testing's always been important in terms of providing reliable and well-performing, rewarding experience for the customer. Customer expects their devices to not only work but to work well. So it requires us to do functional and performance testing. Few key aspects of testing in terms of designing for continuous testing. So something we've seen a lot more of with cloud native architectures and automation, and then doing both functional and performance testing. Networks are certainly becoming more complex in terms of, are network probes sufficient? They're certainly necessary. We see a lot more value as well with crowd-sourced metrics. The more metrics we have, the better we can do a job in terms of testing and optimizing our networks.
Yeah, and I'd like to pick up on Greg's comment there. Definitely the complexity. We're seeing the pace of change accelerate within the network, and we've largely relied on passive analysis in the past for things like service assurance. And if you just think about that term, passive, right, it means that you've detected something after it happened, right? It's already happened to you. It's already happened to your customer. And when you look at the root cause analysis process, we see these large outage bridges, all different types of folks from across the organization looking at PCAPs and trying to understand what's happening in the network. And to keep up with that pace of change, what we're seeing is a move towards active assurance. This is something that we're learning from the cloud scalers with chaos theory, chaos testing, and really implementing that active component to service assurance so you can rapidly identify a degradation as well as isolate automatically where it's occurring. And so we really see a hybrid approach being required. But when we look at what I refer to as machine time services, so things like driverless car, even emergency services, we definitely need to be able to always measure those things and make sure that the network is ready to be able to support those services. And the only way that we see of doing that is through active testing continuously.
Chris, how is it AT&T?
Yeah. I agree with both gentlemen. I do think so. There's the things and then there's the things you don't know that you don't know, right? So there's a lot of times what we end up finding is that you need your network data set, right? The network elements, kind of what the counters that they're extracting. You need your probes because that gives you maybe more of an end-to-end view of what the device is seeing that's fixed in the location. And then you kind of need your crowdsourced data set because that's what the actual end device is experiencing and seeing, right? And I think you kind of stitch that together into some sort of a composite view of overall how the network is doing and the customer experience. So I think we definitely leverage all three kind of facets. I will say all of that also depends on where you are in the technology curve, right? If you're kind of, I remember in the old days, you would, as an engineer, I would look through layer 3 messages, trying to understand why a particular part of the network is not performing well. Ultimately that gets replaced with counters to capture those messages, and then you move on. I think nowadays, most of our engineers don't look at layer 3 messages for optimization. It's more of troubleshooting type of thing, right? And so I think it depends where you are on the technology curve of what level of testing you need for a particular feature or technology, right? As we deploy 5G, SA introduction, all of that kind of brings new level of testing that's required.
So what happens? I mean, if you've got those different sets of data from the metric stats, the kind of the drive testing, the crowd, what happens if they disagree? How do you reconcile which one's right, or is it they just give you a different perspective? Chris, how do you reconcile that?
They give you different. I'll tell you, there's so many times where at an event, let's just say, right, our metrics look great. Our demo accessibility, like ability for people to get on the network looks great. We're maintaining calls. Throughput looks great. Quality of experience looks great. And then I get some executive that complains. Right? They say, "Oh my God, it was horrible." Right? I was at that basketball game and it was horrible. So I think that you kind of have to take each one with its weaknesses and strengths, right? A lot of the crowdsourced data may be more Android leaning, right? Let's just say in terms of the data that it gives you versus node stats, which are aggregated 15 minutes, maybe not individual user, right? So I think you have to take each one and then look at its strengths and weaknesses to kind of come up with a decision of what's the most likely output. I do think that's where AI can come in and help a lot in terms of anomaly detection and look at patterns, right, and understand, well, it's most likely X or Y. So.
Yeah, I agree.
So,
I see it as a complementary type of information. The more metrics that cover different areas, you can get a more holistic picture. And to your point there too, I agree with AI and some of the capabilities with LLMs of gathering some of that information and providing actionable insights is definitely a path forward and has made a lot of growth just the last year or two.
I think the other component that we're seeing is combining AI, machine learning, all this data with automation, right? And for the most part, as much as possible, taking the human out of the loop. And if we look at the AT&T example case, we had an executive that had a bad experience at the basketball game. How do we learn from that experience, take it back to the lab, replay it, but then kind of create automation around it so that we can detect those types of issues and quickly isolate them to what component of the network is causing this, because it's everything from the RAN to the backhaul to the mobile core now, network slicing. There's a lot going on. And just being able to take the humans out of isolating, where is that occurring in the network, can really accelerate, the troubleshooting process, and help find these issues, ideally before they impact the executive.
Right.
So I mean that's an interesting piece. I mean, there's tremendous discussion around machine learning and different types of AI in different parts of the network. But one of the biggest areas, as you mentioned, is around network automation. Do you see the role predominantly around running simulations of the network to analyze and predict things ahead of time? Or do you see it around having a kind of closed loop automation on the live network? Where do you see this kind of machine learning models playing out? And I'll start with the operators here, I think, see what they're currently doing and how they view this. And then we'll head on to the vendor. If that's okay, Gross.
Yeah.
So what are you guys using on AI at the moment, or machine learning?
So we definitely are using automation across different areas. We have started using LLMs a little bit more in terms of trying to gain insights from data. It's still, though, in terms of the environments, whether you're talking about you talk about modeling or out in the field, is being able to test in a controlled environment, starting in the lab, using automation to run through all the tests that we need that are defined both for functionality, having test equipment that we can again fully load a system to evaluate to stress the system, see how it works in a controlled environment, and then out in the field where we do have network probes, we've got drive tests, we've got the use of crowdsourced data as well to gain a picture, and a lot of using anomaly detection to look at areas that need further investigation, both to see if if there's functionality that features not working as expected, or to optimize the network as well.
And Chris, on the ATC side, where are you using machine learning or AI today, and where do you see it going?
I mean, so I think your question was kind of twofold. One is the closed loop piece, like automation and management, versus the modeling of kind of predictive analytics. So on the closed loop, we've been doing a lot of that for years, right? In terms of managing parameters in the network, managing performance, kind of rule-based engine style work, right? And we've been doing that for a number of years in terms of improving performance, right? In terms of predicting and modeling, hey, if I do X, what will happen with Y, and leveraging that, I think there's been some struggles. I think finding the right use cases where it can bring value to the business is probably where we spend a lot of time on, right? I think also the business has changed. If you look at 5 years ago, 7 years ago, it was kind of a rush to, hey, I've got the lowest drop go rate, I've got the fastest network, things like that. It was very, very much performance driven. So a lot of the automation algorithms focused on that, right? I would say nowadays, right, it's like I think performance is table stakes pretty much, right? I think it's the customer expects to be able to have the service. And so now it's about how can I run a network at the lowest cost per gigabyte, right? While delivering that excellent customer experience. So a lot of the automation, and I think a lot of the predictive stuff is changing a little bit. The use cases are changing more towards lower OpEx, right? I think that's driving also a lot of the innovation. So
yeah, to add to that point, I fully agree that there's a lot of our work in energy efficiency savings and features in terms of using AI to understand what parts of the network or radios can we turn off to gain those power savings and reduce OpEx costs as well.
Great.
Yeah, in terms of closed loop, this is an area where we've been working with many carriers, some of the folks on this call, and we've been able to automate 80% of the tickets coming into a particular knock, where the ticket comes in, it's automatically tested. The customer's complaining that their service isn't working, and it just automatically kicks off a workflow to validate, is that circuit up and running? Am I getting data through it? Am I hitting my SLA targets? And then, yes, as much as possible, even closing that ticket if no fault is found, but then also compiling all of that information and handing it off to the engineer if it is, an open loop situation where, hey, the circuit is down, you need to go deal with it. And by the way, we've isolated it to this hop between these two routers. So yeah, definitely moving towards closed loop. And when you first asked the question, Ian, you were asking, what could be done in the lab versus in the live. And, we want to take all of these learnings from the live network and implement them into test cases in the live, create that digital twin. But as the AT&T folks were indicating, there's always things that are going to be different in the live network. You just can't create that scale. You can't create the dynamicism of everything your customer is going to do. So you need to be able to constantly, have the eyes and ears ready for whether it's closed loop or open loop systems to be gathering that information and ideally trying to get ahead of those issues before they impact customers.
Yeah, I would also say there's a lot of, a lot of times we're trying to speed up how long you spend testing in the lab environment, right? I think we're really trying to minimize that and get as quickly as possible into the field where you can actually have some live traffic, right? So that's been a movement, right? Don't get stuck in the lab, get the minimum viable product done and kind of get going, right? So
speed the innovation cycles, essentially.
you have
Yeah.
to be competitive.
Yeah. I
Really
mean,
take
this
that,
kind of
CI/CD model, right, from the cloud scalers and implement it for carrier networks and services.
I mean, this is the thing that I think we're seeing at CCS in many areas. There's a lot of change happening in the networks, a lot of innovation, a lot of people moving different things forward, maybe at different speeds in different parts of the world. Europe maybe not being at the leadership, North America, parts of APAC will be further ahead. When you look at things like shifting on to standalone, onto 5G advanced, when you start looking at the network densification, there's obviously the piece around disaggregated networks and open interfaces. There is features coming forward like RedCap to lower the cost of some of the 5G, but again, that needs an operator network upgrade or a deployment to happen. There's a lot happening across the board in different areas around these networks improving and changing. Which ones of these have the greatest effect on testing requirements or testing approaches? And how are you guys adjusting to it? Because it seems that the networks are getting much more complex.
I
I'll
think
follow
from
again at the operators to begin with, or the carriers to begin with. So that's good. Whoever wants to take it, Chris or
Yeah,
go.
I can
Go.
start.
no,
I
go
can
ahead.
start. So I'd say definitely, the deployment, like I feel with standalone, that's kind of the next evolution that you mentioned. But we're kind of in this weird world now where you have non-standalone, standalone, LTE, you have a mixture of devices, some older devices, some newer devices. And so I think the migration to standalone required a bit more testing. I think also with that came deployment of large swaths of mid-band spectrum that's TDD. For a lot of the operators, I think that resulted in kind of more enhanced testing that was needed that traditionally operating FDD networks we didn't have to do, right? And so I think it's just been a bit of a mindset change in terms of how do we go from LTE to NSA to SA and at the same time introduce TDD. So I think that's required a bit more field testing, I would say. Like in general, I think we try to stay away from drive testing and things like that. But with SA and tuning that, I think that's required a bit more field measurements. So.
Yeah, I fully agree there. And a few additional, so with the 5G core and introduction of cloud native development, a lot, smaller microservices, pieces of the network that can iterate faster. And so just that CI/CD process and having test more built into the development of and releases of features there has changed how we're testing. Yeah, and in addition to like you mentioned, the different technologies with 5G SA and then coexisting with NSA and LTE and on the device side as well. The number of spectrum bands, again, each spectrum has its purpose, but there are different constraints, so shared spectrum or different power constraints. So it adds a lot of different dimensions to cover. Another area is use cases too, in terms of different traffic needs and expectations for, if you're talking mobile broadband versus fixed wireless access, looking at IoT, the expectations of the user and requirements on the traffic are quite different, and we need to validate the performance, for each class on its own, but also as a mix together to make sure we're utilizing our resources effectively across all the different use cases. So
And I
it's
guess, I
certainly
mean,
more
the
complex.
fixed wireless versus broadband use case is an interesting one, because what we've seen at CCS is a number of operators globally use a network slice to segregate the traffic. And of course, network slicing itself adds extra complexity, because you may be wanting to offer an SLA on the back of it if it's an external customer rather than your own internal FWA traffic. And that presumably adds complexity too on the testing side. Ross, do you want to jump in on any of this?
Yeah, absolutely. And so that was going to be one of the biggest changes that I was going to bring up, right? Is that we're now seeing mobile operators offering enterprise services, so fixed line enterprise slicing, and this is bringing that idea of SLA from fixed line over to the mobile network, which is something in mobile we've never dealt with before. And so that brings through a whole number of technologies, as well as a lot of scrutiny and potentially even penalties on the network that can come with very significant costs. So yeah, a lot of innovation happening in that area, and taking kind of the best principles that we learned from enterprise services fixed line and applying them to mobile. So things like at the beginning of time, doing automated service activation testing, leveraging the standards that we developed for fixed lines, and then moving into that SLA assurance model is really critical to deliver those types of services.
Let me ask you on that though. Is that really testing, or is that basically you just have to refine how you measure success, right? And your KPIs and your ability to measure SLAs and having the framework in place, right? You're not really testing for new outcomes. You're more measuring the success of a new service, right?
Yeah,
Well, what I've
absolutely.
seen,
And we do that through tests, right? So specs like 6349, 2544, just validating that circuit is up and you can hit the throughput requirement that you're promising to your customer. You can hit the latency requirement. And then just actively monitoring for that, right? Making sure that, especially with business services, they tend to be a lot more temporal than consumer services. So, if it's a bank or somebody doing financial transactions, that's obviously going to start at 9 a.m. So at 8 a.m., you don't know anymore, right? If it's ready. So that's why an active test, if you inject that, you could say, okay, we know we're confident at 8 a.m. that it's going to work at 9 a.m. And just rolling into it that way, just getting the confidence that that service is going to be there when it's needed. Same thing for first responders. So this is something, we work on together with FirstNet as an example, just making sure that that network is always there through active testing.
I think what we've seen, or what I've seen, is that what a challenge with slicing, if you were to offer an external slice to an external customer, is can you be sure the network can deliver on the SLA? And so a lot of the slices that have been offered commercially are often regional rather than national, because it's easier to kind of test the network and be fairly confident you can offer the SLA in that region, that locality. But of course, that isn't the ideal. You need to have that feedback loop, that automation, to know how it's doing all the time, so you can push that further forward. I'm going to fire a completely different question, you guys, which isn't on the list that we talked about ahead of time. Events have overtaken us slightly, and I see a question on a similar topic in the chat. Obviously, Spain is high profile in the news at the moment because of the national power outage. What can network testing tell us or help us to prepare for an event like that when everything goes down, or help a telecom operator bring back the network safely when power is restored? Slightly different question in the chat, but I think it's an interesting one. It's very topical at the moment. I've had press questions coming in this morning on it. It's a story that's rolling. And I think there'll be a lot of discussions on resilience in other markets, other countries on the back of this. So how can testing help us either prepare for an event like that, or help us prepare to bring things back when things go down? And I'll open to anyone on this, whoever wants to jump in first.
Yeah, so I guess this is an area where we've been working with many of the carriers, and we're seeing, especially in areas where that's prone to hurricane damage or natural disaster, the carriers are investing in that resiliency, right? And making sure that, you've got your cell tower, you've got your fiber out to it, and then you've got potentially a microwave backup to that. And we're even seeing, a third level of backup being added in through low Earth orbit satellite. And just validating that, primary, secondary, tertiary, and even the fourth connection is there, it's up and running, and then validating power backup, and that, testing those failover mechanisms as well, and kind of going into that chaos theory in the live network, which is scary at times, but we're starting to see that happen where, we will pull the blade and make sure that the failover and everything that we're investing on the core for cloud scale is actually working, and then all the way out to the resiliency and redundancy at the edge.
Chris, Greg?
Yeah, I mean, resiliency is definitely, we spend a lot of time on resiliency, right? I mean, and a lot of that is more in the planning type of phase, right? Making sure you kind of minimize blast radius, right? If I have a fiber outage, maximum number of sites I'll impact, things like that, right? Central office resiliency. At our cell sites, we have generators, backup batteries, things like that, right? All kind of help from a resiliency perspective, keep the lights on. I think definitely though, the kind of the LEO stuff in our partnership with AST, a lot of the satellite stuff is now offering that almost safety blanket to some extent on these kind of large scale natural events that knock out half a state. So I think that's changed the game quite a bit, is the satellite space, right?
But I think that's interesting, because I think a lot of the resiliency, as you said, is about maybe a region going out because of hurricane, or some cell towers going down because of a fiber cut or something.
Right.
This is more of a kind of black swan event where the whole thing goes down, the whole country goes down. And the question with an NTN that I've been pondering is, the messaging still has to route back through the cellular network, I think, on the current solutions we've got deployed. So you still need your core up, you still need your core data center up, and you need the connector from that probably to a cellular base station, all working at a minimum. Because a lot of the use cases with NTN have been more about someone's in a wilderness area or a bit of the network goes down. It hasn't really been discussed as the whole electricity grid goes for a prolonged period, which is a slightly different scenario. I don't know. Jump in, Greg.
Yeah, no, I think that, I mean, certainly redundancy is important, and it can be hard to envision all the different type of scenarios, but resiliency in terms of the different, if we're talking about backhaul, if we're talking about when especially with disaggregated networks, if we've got multiple links to different locations, we did get with the hurricanes, Helene, and it was the last year, certainly dealing with outages and having backup, backup power, backup links put up quickly in place. Having those designs again in the planning stage, in the design stage, is important. Validating those, because often they're thought of as, you don't think you'll need them until you actually do, and so validating that infrastructure is important up front, even when it's not necessarily in use. In terms of preparing for entire systems going down, that's can look at it, I think, in terms of making sure we're redundant in different areas to try to keep systems as robust as possible. But it certainly is a challenge.
Right. So there's a question in the chat.
I just wanted to add one more thing that we are working with all the carriers on for these types of events is, we always see a traffic spike during, any event like this, a power outage or a hurricane or something like that. So making sure that we have a prioritization scheme as well, so that first responders can communicate is really critical. And that's something that we've been doing a lot of testing on, and making sure that, in that overload scenario, that first responder traffic and those priority slices can still get through.
I mean, that obviously is particularly important if this regular cellular network is being used for both first responders and regular users, which that varies by country. Often, in the UK, that's potentially one of the models for the ESN. I know that happens in the US. Other countries, often there are separate dedicated networks. So it varies by market there, I guess, on that.
Yep.
There's a question in the chat, and I'm going to park or not take today, but later in the day, there's another session on NTN and cellular where I think the question in the chat about latency is probably more relevant. I did want to get to one more question around the shift to disaggregating networks, open RAN, and multi-vendor type solutions here, and what does that mean for testing and measurement challenges? And I want to get to that one because I think it's particularly relevant with some of the people we have on the call today. So for that, what does that mean for you guys, and how does that affect what needs to happen?
I think a few challenges. I'll go ahead.
No, go, Greg.
Yeah, I was going to add. So certainly a few challenges in terms of interoperability, especially if we're talking about multi-vendor O-RAN type solutions. Ensuring that components from different vendors operate at open interfaces and are compliant to the specifications there. And also don't suffer from a loss of performance in order to remain compliant. Having standard compliant test equipment to validate that vendors conform to these interfaces. A lot of the certification and badging efforts taken at O-RAN Alliance. There are a number of OTIC labs, the Open Test and Integration Centers, some government-funded efforts as well with Accord and Valor to make available test beds for vendors to interoperate and validate that common interpretations of specifications and so forth. The other key item I think is a skill transformation in terms of moving towards O-RAN, more cloud native technology, but where is that integration work happening? Either the operator can take that on and do more of the integration of components, or have a lead vendor to take on that integration effort. But either way, there's definitely a skill set transformation needed to get that specialized knowledge in the interfaces and the cloud native technology as well.
And Chris, what are you saying here? I mean, one of the striking things when I look at some of the vendors that are coming through here is some of the big vendors have now started to embrace Open RAN, but maybe their hardware is Open RAN compliant, but it doesn't necessarily ship with all the software for the open interfaces on day one. So does that add extra complexity for you guys as well? Or is it just the basics of making sure the different bits of the solution work together? Does the software upgrade add extra complexity?
Yeah, I mean, obviously, right? So I think definitely the complexity increases, and we're not going to get more people to deal with that increase. So, but what I will say is, though, and it was something we touched on earlier, which is the good thing about when we look at the ecosystem of how we measure and test is that device-centric view, right? Because the device didn't change. They don't care about what the network is, whether it's disaggregated or not, right? To them, a drop call is a drop call. So I think you do see this kind of, you probably have more of a dependence on the crowdsource type of data sets to look at as I'm migrating, right? Am I seeing an impact to the customer experience? Because again, there's going to be a lot of unknowns as you start mixing and matching dominoes, right? And Lego sets on the network side, but the customer stays the same. So I think there'll be a dependence more on device-centric crowdsource KPIs to kind of help offset some of that.
Okay, I think we're at time, but I would give Ross one brief second for the final word there on the time. So just maybe a couple of sentences tops.
Yeah. So I think what we're seeing is it starts in the lab with that conformance, performance, and scalability, just to reinforce what Greg was saying, and then we roll out into that CI, CD, and then into operations.
Great. Well, thank you very much, and hopefully everyone will stay listening to the rest of the event, where we have a bunch of other exciting, interesting panels with the opportunity to ask questions from the audience as well. Thank you very much.
All right.
Thank you.
Thanks all.
Have a good
Cheers.
one.
Thank you.